When a kid ages out of the system, they're given a trash bag for their belongings and a bus token to nowhere. For my sister and me, it was 2 trash bags, no tokens, and a secret dugout in the woods that would end up saving our lives. If you've ever felt like the world has thrown you away, I need you to hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. It's for every person who had to build their own home from scratch with nothing but dirt and hope. The lock on the front door of the Miller house clicked shut with a sound like a bone snapping. It was a clean, final sound. I stood on the cracked concrete of the porch, the plastic handles of 2 black trash bags cutting into my fingers. One for me, one for my sister Maya. I had turned 18 that morning. Mrs. Miller had handed me a cupcake with a single unlit candle stuck in the frosting and a folded piece of paper. The paper was my official termination of care notice. The cupcake was, I guess, a consolation prize. "The state's done with you now, Leo," she'd said, not unkindly, but with the weary finality of a bureaucrat closing a file. "You're a man. Time to make your own way." My own way. I looked at Maya, who was 16 and still officially in the system's care. But Mrs. Miller had made it clear that with me gone, the state would find a more suitable placement for her. We both knew what that meant. Another home, another set of strangers, another school. We'd been separated once before, for 6 months that felt like 6 years. We weren't doing it again. So when I walked, she walked. Her bag was lighter than mine, filled with a couple of hoodies, some worn paperbacks, and a sketchbook. Mine held my few clothes, a worn copy of a book our mom used to read to us, and an envelope a social worker had given me last week. The envelope felt heavier than everything else combined. We stood on the sidewalk as the Miller's front light switched off, plunging the porch into shadow. It wasn't cruel, not really. It was just efficient. We were a line item whose budget had expired. The air was cold, that damp, biting cold of late autumn that promises a bitter winter. I could see my breath, a small, fleeting cloud in the orange glow of the streetlight. Maya pulled her thin hoodie tighter, shivering. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, her eyes wide in the gloom, asking the question that was screaming in my own head. Now what? I was the adult. I was supposed to have a plan. But all I had was a crumpled $20 bill in my pocket and the heavy envelope. I had spent 2 years in this house, sleeping in a small room with a window that overlooked a chain-link fence. I'd followed the rules, kept my head down, and waited for the day I'd be free. I just never imagined freedom would feel so much like being pushed off a cliff. There was no anger, not yet, just a profound, hollow emptiness. The world was huge, and we were 2 tiny specks with 2 trash bags standing on a curb in a suburb that was already forgetting we existed. We were a problem that had been solved by deletion. We started walking, with no destination in mind. We just knew we couldn't stay there, a pair of ghosts haunting the edge of a life that was no longer ours. Each step felt unreal, the plastic bags rustling against my legs like dry leaves. The neighborhood was quiet, houses dark, cars asleep in their driveways. It was a world of neat lawns and locked doors, and we were on the outside of all of it. We walked until the manicured lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks and storefronts with metal grates pulled over them. We found a 24-hour bus station, its fluorescent lights humming a sad, constant tune. The air inside was thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. We found a pair of hard plastic chairs and sat. Maya leaned her head against my shoulder and was asleep in minutes, exhausted by the sheer weight of the day. I stayed awake, watching the few other people scattered around the terminal. A man with a newspaper for a blanket. A woman talking softly to a stained backpack. We weren't alone, but it wasn't a comforting thought. We had just joined the Legion of the Lost. I pulled the envelope out of my bag. It was a standard manila envelope, addressed to me in Sharpie. Inside was a sheaf of papers, held together with a paperclip. On top was a note from Ms. Albright, the last in a long line of social workers assigned to our case. Her handwriting was in neat, sterile cursive. "Leo," it read, "enclosed is the deed to the property left to your mother by your grandfather, which now passes to you as her next of kin. It's a small parcel, undeveloped, in Pike County. I'm sorry to say it's not worth much, mostly swampland and second-growth timber, according to the county assessment. But it is legally yours. Happy birthday. I wish you the best." I unfolded the deed. It was a photocopy, filled with dense legal language, but the important parts were clear. A plot number, a reference to a county map, and a name: Arthur Vance. Our grandfather, a man we'd never met, who had died before we were born. Our mom never talked about him, and when we were little, we'd just assumed he was a ghost, a name without a face. And he had left us land. Worthless land, according to Ms. Albright, but land nonetheless. It was the only thing in the entire world, aside from the clothes on our backs, that belonged to us. I looked at the location: Pike County. It was a 3-hour bus ride away, a rural stretch of hills and forests I'd only ever seen on a map. I looked at Maya, her face pale under the harsh lighting, and then back at the deed. It wasn't a plan. It was barely an idea. But it was something. It was a direction. It was a place to go that wasn't here. I nudged her awake. "Maya," I whispered, "I think I know where we're going." She blinked, her eyes still hazy with sleep. She looked at the deed in my hand, then back at my face, searching for a sign that I wasn't completely crazy. I tried to give her a confident smile, but I'm sure it looked as terrified as I felt. "We're going home," I said, the word feeling foreign and strange on my tongue. We didn't have a home, but maybe, just maybe, we could build one. The bus groaned its way out of the city before dawn. We sat in the back, the worn vinyl of the seats cold against our skin. I watched the city lights blur and then vanish, replaced by the dark, hulking shapes of the suburbs, and then finally, the wide-open blackness of the countryside. Maya was quiet, her forehead pressed against the vibrating window. I wondered what she was thinking, if she was as scared as I was. We had about $16 left after buying the one-way tickets. No food, no gear, just 2 bags of clothes and a piece of paper that said we owned a patch of dirt 3 hours away. It was the stupidest plan in the world. But the alternative was staying in the city, where we'd be separated within a day. The system would swallow Maya back up and spit me out onto the street. This was our only chance to stick together. And for me, that was the only thing that mattered. My whole life, the world had been taking things from us. Our parents, our homes, our friends. I wasn't going to let it take my sister. The sun came up slowly, a weak, watery light filtering through the gray clouds. The landscape that emerged was bleak. Brown fields, skeletal trees, rusted-out cars sinking into muddy yards. The towns we passed through were small and tired, their main streets lined with boarded-up shops and faded flags. This was Pike County. It looked like a place the world had forgotten. My heart sank a little with every mile. What was I bringing us to? A piece of worthless land in the middle of a forgotten county. Was this better than a shelter? Was this better than a new foster home for Maya? The doubt was a physical weight in my chest. I felt Maya shift next to me. She wasn't looking out the window anymore. She was watching me. "It's going to be okay, Leo," she said, her voice soft but firm. It was what I was supposed to be saying to her. "We're good at this," she added, "at surviving." She was right. We were survivors. We'd been surviving our whole lives. This was just a new chapter in the same old book. Her faith in me was a small, warm coal in the center of my fear. I had to make this work. For her. The bus let us off in a town called Harmony, which was ironic because the place felt anything but. It was a crossroads with a gas station, a diner with a flickering sign, and a general store with a dusty porch. The bus pulled away, leaving us in a cloud of diesel fumes and a profound silence. We were the only two people on the street. I showed the deed to the old man behind the counter at the general store. He looked at it, then at us, his eyes lingering on our trash bags. He had a face like a crumpled map, all lines and creases. "Arthur Vance's plot," he said, his voice raspy. "Yeah, I know the one. Out past the old quarry. Ain't nothing out there but scrub pine and deer flies." He gave us vague directions, pointing down a 2-lane road that disappeared into the trees. "It's a good 3-mile walk. You kids ain't planning on camping out there, are you? Supposed to get cold tonight." I lied. I told him we were just looking at it for a relative. He didn't look like he believed me, but he sold us a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and 2 bottles of water without another word. It took almost all of our remaining money. The walk was long. The road was lined with dense forest, a wall of green and brown. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. It was clean, so different from the city's smog. But it was also unnerving. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of our shoes on the gravel shoulder and the occasional caw of a crow. We were utterly alone. After what felt like an eternity, we found it. A rusted metal post with a faded number on it, half swallowed by weeds. It matched the number on the deed. I pushed through a tangle of thorny bushes. There was no path, no clearing, just trees. A dense, chaotic forest of pine and oak and tangled undergrowth, sloping down into a dark, marshy hollow. This was it, our inheritance, a wall of trees. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Ms. Albright was right. It was worthless. I had dragged my sister 3 hours away from any kind of help to a patch of cold, wet woods with nothing but a jar of peanut butter. I had failed. I sank down onto a fallen log, the fight going out of me. "I'm sorry, Maya," I whispered. "This was a stupid idea." I waited for her to cry, to yell at me. I deserved it. But she didn't. She dropped her bag and walked a few feet into the woods, pushing aside a low-hanging branch. She looked around, her head tilted, as if she were listening to something I couldn't hear. The sunlight, weak as it was, filtered through the canopy, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. It was almost pretty if you weren't homeless. "It's quiet," she said finally. "It's ours." She turned to me, and there was a look in her eye I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't hope exactly. It was something tougher. It was determination. "So, what's the plan, big brother?" she asked, a small, challenging smile on her face. "We can't just sit here." Her strength jolted me out of my self-pity. She was right. We had to do something. We couldn't go back. We had to go forward. And forward was into the woods. Okay, I said, standing up and brushing the dirt off my pants. Okay, first things first. We need a shelter, a real one, something warm and dry. I looked at the sloping ground, the thick trees, the soft, damp earth. An idea, born from some survival show I'd half watched a year ago, began to form in my mind. A crazy idea, but no crazier than anything else we'd done that day. We're going to dig, I said. We're going to build a dugout, something hidden, something no one can take away from us. The work was brutal. We had no tools, just our hands and a few large flat rocks we found near a creek bed. The first day we barely managed to scrape away the top layer of leaves and loose soil in a 10 by 10 foot square. We chose a spot on a gentle slope, nestled between the roots of two massive oak trees. My plan, if you could call it that, was to dig down 4 or 5 feet, line the walls and roof with logs, and cover the whole thing with the dirt we'd excavated, plus a layer of leaves and moss. A hidden room under the forest floor, a den. That night, we huddled together under a thick pine, sharing peanut butter sandwiches. The cold was a living thing. It seeped into our bones, making our teeth chatter. Every snap of a twig in the darkness sent a jolt of fear through me. We were exposed, vulnerable. The dugout wasn't just a project, it was a necessity. It was the only thing standing between us and freezing to death. The next day we walked back to town. We spent our last few dollars on a shovel and a small hatchet at the general store. The old man gave us a long, searching look, but didn't ask any questions. He even threw in a pair of worn leather gloves. "For splinters," was all he said. The shovel changed everything. It was still back-breaking labor, but now we were making progress. We took turns. One of us would dig, loosening the dense, clay-like soil, while the other would haul the dirt away in our now empty trash bags. Our bodies ached in ways we never knew they could. Our hands were blistered and raw, even with the gloves. Our muscles screamed. But with every shovelful of dirt, a small piece of my fear was replaced by a grim sense of purpose. We weren't just digging a hole. We were carving out a space for ourselves in a world that had told us there was no space for us. We were building a home with the only thing we had, our own sweat and stubbornness. After a week of relentless digging, the hole was deep enough. It was a rectangular pit, about shoulder height, smelling of damp earth and roots. It was ugly and crude, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Now came the hard part, the structure. We used the hatchet to chop down smaller pine trees for the walls and roof beams. We were clumsy at first, the hatchet glancing off the wood, but we learned. We learned the rhythm of the swing, the satisfying thud of the blade biting into the wood. We wedged the logs into place, creating a sturdy frame. We laid a thick layer of smaller branches over the roof beams, then covered it with our trash bags as a waterproof layer. It was a sad, pathetic use for the symbols of our eviction, but it felt right. Finally, we began the slow process of covering the roof with the dirt we had dug out. We worked together, a silent, efficient team. As the last layer of soil went on, followed by moss and leaves we gathered from the forest floor, the structure vanished. From more than 10 feet away, it was just a slight, unremarkable mound of earth. We had built a secret. We left a small, low opening, which we could cover with a flap of woven branches and leaves. Inside, it was dark and smelled of pine and fresh-cut wood. It was small, barely big enough for us to lie down side by side. But when a cold rain started to fall that evening, we crawled inside, and for the first time in weeks, we were warm and dry. The sound of the rain was a soft drumming on the roof above us, a gentle, soothing sound. It wasn't a house. It wasn't even a room. It was a hole in the ground. But it was our hole, and it was safe. In the following days, we settled into a routine. We would spend the mornings foraging for more firewood or trying to improve the dugout. In the afternoons, Maya would draw in her sketchbook while I explored our small kingdom. It was during one of these explorations that I found it. At the far edge of our property, where the land dipped down into a marshy thicket, I stumbled upon the remains of a building. It was barely more than a skeleton, a few rotting timbers and a sagging roofline. A hunting shed, maybe. Most of it had collapsed, but one corner was still standing, protected by a fallen tree. I pushed aside a curtain of vines and peered inside. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay, and there, in the corner, half buried under a pile of debris, was a dark green metal box. It was an old military-style ammo can, heavy and solid, with a rusted latch. It was locked. A deep, instinctual feeling told me that this box was important, that it was the reason we were here, that our grandfather, the ghost, had left us more than just a worthless piece of land. He had left us a key. Getting the box back to the dugout was an ordeal. It was heavier than it looked, solid and dense. Maya's eyes went wide when she saw it. We spent the rest of the day trying to open it. We pried at the latch with the hatchet. We smashed it with rocks. The rusted metal refused to yield. It was infuriating. This box, which felt so significant, was mocking us with its silence. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, I had an idea. I took the hatchet and, instead of trying to force the latch, I started methodically striking the hinge pins. It was slow work, the clang of metal on metal echoing in the quiet woods. Rust flakes flew off with every strike. After what felt like an hour, one of the pins finally gave, groaning in protest before sliding out. Then the second. The lid didn't spring open. It just sat there. I took a deep breath and lifted it. The inside was perfectly dry. A rubber gasket around the lid had kept the contents pristine for what must have been decades. It wasn't filled with money or gold. It was filled with paper, neatly stacked bundles of letters tied with twine, a collection of old yellowed maps, and on top of it all, a single thick envelope with the words, "To whomever cares," written in a strong, deliberate hand. My hands were trembling as I picked it up. This was it. This was a message from our grandfather. I broke the wax seal, which crumbled to dust, and unfolded the letter. The paper was thick and creamy, and it was covered in the same handwriting as the envelope. "If you are reading this," it began, "it means I have failed. It means I am gone, and the world has moved on without me. It also means you have found my last will and testament. Not the legal kind. The lawyers have that, and it's not worth much. This is the real one." I sat at the entrance to our dugout, the fading afternoon light illuminating the page, and I read his story aloud to Maya, who sat beside me, her knees drawn to her chest. His name was Arthur Vance, and he was not the man we had imagined. He wasn't a ghost or a deadbeat. He was a geologist. He had spent his life studying the earth, working for oil companies at first, and then, after seeing the damage they did, for himself. He wrote about our mother, his daughter, with a deep, aching love. He said he had to leave her with her mother because his work became too dangerous. He was fighting battles against powerful people. In the late 1980s, his research led him to Pike County. He had discovered something incredible, something the big energy companies were also sniffing around for. It wasn't oil, it was water. "Beneath this specific plot of land," he wrote, lies the heart of a small, unique freshwater aquifer, a lens of pure, clean water, filtered through a rare combination of sandstone and granite. It's not large, but it's pristine, a geological miracle. At the time, a company called Triton Energy was buying up mineral rights all over the county, planning to use a new technique called hydraulic fracturing, fracking. They knew the water was there, but they didn't see it as a resource to be protected. They saw it as an industrial lubricant, something to be used, poisoned with chemicals, and pumped back into the ground. I couldn't let that happen. He explained that he used every penny he had to buy this one small plot of land. It wasn't much, but it sat directly over the most vulnerable part of the aquifer. As long as he owned it, they couldn't drill there. It was a tiny act of defiance, a one-man roadblock. He had planned to establish a formal conservation easement to protect it forever, but he ran out of time and money. The legal battles drained him, and then he got sick. "I have left you a legacy," the letter concluded, "and I am sorry for what a burden it is. This land is not a gift. It is a responsibility. The world will tell you it is worthless. Developers will come and offer you money. They will tell you it's a fortune, and for someone with nothing, it will be. But what they are buying is not just dirt. They are buying the right to poison this water. They are buying the right to destroy something pure and irreplaceable. I do not know who you are, a grandchild perhaps, or a stranger who stumbled upon this. But I am begging you, do not sell. Protect this place. It was the only thing I had left to give the world. It was my last stand." I finished reading. The letter trembled in my hand. The woods around us were no longer just trees. The ground beneath our feet was no longer just dirt. It was a legacy, a battlefield. My grandfather hadn't abandoned us. He had entrusted us with the most important thing in his life. He had left us a choice. I looked at Maya. Her face was pale, her eyes glistening with tears. She wasn't crying for us, for our hardship. She was crying for the grandfather we never knew, and for the incredible, terrible weight he had just placed on our shoulders. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unspoken question, what do we do now? And as if on cue, we heard a sound that didn't belong in these woods. The crunch of expensive shoes on dry leaves. A man in a crisp gray suit was walking towards us. He stopped about 20 feet from our dugout, his eyes scanning the area. He hadn't seen our shelter yet. He looked out of place, a creature of conference rooms and air conditioning dropped into the wild. He had a polished, predatory smile. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone here? I'm looking for the owner of this property." My heart hammered against my ribs. I tucked the letter behind my back and slowly stood up, stepping out from the cover of the trees. Maya stayed put, hidden in the shadows of the dugout's entrance. "I'm the owner," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. The man's smile widened. He walked closer, extending a hand. I didn't take it. "Excellent," he said, his eyes flicking over my dirty clothes and tangled hair with a flicker of disdain he couldn't quite hide. "My name is David Finch. I'm a land acquisition manager for the Blue Ridge Development Group. We're planning a new luxury cabin community in this area, and your parcel is one of the last key pieces we need." He pulled a sleek tablet from a leather briefcase. "Look, I'll be direct. The county assesses this land at next to nothing. It's undevelopable for residential purposes due to the terrain and lack of utilities. It's basically worthless." He said the word worthless with the same casual dismissal as Ms. Albright. It was the official story. The lie. However, he continued, tapping on his tablet, we have a vested interest in consolidating the entire tract. So for the sake of expediency, Blue Ridge is prepared to offer you a one-time payment of $250,000. The number hung in the air between us. It was so large it felt unreal. $250,000. It was a spaceship. It was a winning lottery ticket. It was a fantasy. I thought of the cold nights, the gnawing hunger, the constant fear. That money could solve every problem we had. A warm apartment, food, new clothes, school for Maya, a future. It was everything we had ever dreamed of. I glanced back towards the dugout, where I knew Maya was listening. I saw her small, pale face peeking out from the shadows. Her expression was terrified, but also resolute. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. No. Life-changing money, kid, Finch said, sensing my hesitation. He thought it was the greed of a teenager wanting more. He couldn't possibly understand the war raging inside me. Think about it. You could walk away from all this. He gestured vaguely at the woods, at my life. Go to college, buy a car, never have to worry again. Never have to worry again. The words were a siren song. It was the easy path, the sensible path. It was the path anyone else in our position would take without a second thought. But then I felt the phantom weight of my grandfather's letter in my hand. I am begging you, do not sell. He had trusted us, a complete stranger, a descendant he'd never met. He had trusted that we would understand, that we would care. And right now, I need to ask you something. If you've made it this far in the story, you're invested. You're in these woods with us. So I want you to be honest. Put it in the comments below. What would you do? Take the money and run, or honor the wish of a dead man you never knew? There's no right answer, but your choice says a lot about who you are. And while you're down there, if this story is resonating with you, if you've ever had to choose between the easy wrong and the harder right, please hit that like and subscribe button. We're building a community here for people who understand that the most valuable things in life are never for sale. Okay, let's get back to the woods. I looked David Finch straight in the eye. I saw the calculation there, the certainty that he had us. He saw two desperate, dirty kids. He saw an easy win. He didn't see Arthur Vance's grandchildren. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent woods with the force of a falling tree. Finch's smile faltered. He blinked, as if he'd misheard me. I'm sorry, what? The answer is no, I said, my voice stronger this time. The land isn't for sale. For a moment, he looked genuinely baffled. The idea of someone turning down that kind of money for a worthless piece of land was simply not in his programming. Then the bafflement hardened into annoyance. The friendly mask slipped. Kid, let's not play games, he said, his tone turning sharp. This is a serious, one-time offer. I'd advise you to take it. I heard you, I said, standing my ground, and I'm advising you to get off my property. His face flushed with anger. You don't know who you're dealing with, he hissed. Blue Ridge has been working on this project for 5 years. We have the county board in our pocket. We have the best lawyers in the state. You think you, a homeless teenager, can stop us? We'll get this land one way or another. We can tie you up in court for years until you're bankrupt. We can petition for eminent domain for utility access. You'll end up with nothing. I'm offering you a fortune. Don't be a fool. The threats were real. I knew he wasn't bluffing. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach. But my grandfather's words echoed louder. a tiny act of defiance. This was our turn. This was our stand. "I guess I'm a fool then," I said. "Now leave." Finch stared at me for a long moment, his eyes cold and hard. He looked like he was memorizing my face, filing it away under problems to be eliminated. He finally snapped his briefcase shut. "You'll regret this," he spat. He turned and walked away, his angry footsteps crashing through the undergrowth until the sound faded completely. I stood there, trembling, my legs feeling weak. The adrenaline drained away, leaving me shaky and cold. I had just made an enemy of a very powerful company. I had just turned down more money than I could even comprehend for a principle, for a promise to a ghost. I stumbled back to the dugout and collapsed at the entrance. Maya crawled out and wrapped her arms around. She was trembling too. "You did it," she whispered into my shoulder. "You were so brave." I was terrified, I admitted, my voice muffled. "Me too," she said, "but we did the right thing. Grandpa would be proud." The word grandpa sounded natural, real. He wasn't a name on a deed anymore. He was family. We sat there for a long time, holding on to each other as the woods grew dark around us. The elation of our small victory was already being replaced by the chilling reality of our situation. Finch was right. We couldn't fight them alone. We had no money, no resources, no knowledge of the law. We had a dugout, a hatchet, and a letter. It felt like we were standing on a beach, trying to hold back a tsunami with our bare hands. The next morning, we woke with a new, urgent sense of purpose. The fight was no longer theoretical. It was here. We needed help. We needed a plan. I reread our grandfather's letter, searching for clues. He mentioned legal battles, lawyers. He must have left a paper trail. "The lawyers have that," he'd written, referring to his official will. The first step was to find out who those lawyers were. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. We packed up the most important things, the box of letters, the deed, and the small stash of cash we'd been hoarding from odd jobs we'd started doing for the general store owner, stocking shelves, sweeping floors. He'd pay us in a mix of cash and groceries. It wasn't much, but it was a start. We walked into Harmony and caught the first bus to the county seat, a larger town called Port Monroe. The county courthouse was an imposing old building of granite and marble, with steps worn smooth by a century of people seeking justice or trying to escape it. Finding information was a nightmare. We were bounced from the records office to the probate court to the land registry. We were met with bored clerks, confusing forms, and suspicious looks. We were two scruffy kids asking about a will that was 30 years old. No one wanted to help us. After hours of frustration, we were about to give up when a clerk, a young woman who looked not much older than me, took pity on us. She listened to our story, her expression softening. She spent her lunch break digging through an old digital archive, and she found it. The probate record for Arthur Vance, and in it, the name of the law firm that handled his estate, Dawson, Finch and Associates. Finch. It couldn't be a coincidence. David Finch, the man from the woods, worked for a firm that had once been co-founded by a man with the same last name. This was deeper and older than we thought. The firm was still in business, though now it was just Dawson and Associates. They were located 2 towns over. We knew we couldn't just walk in there. We needed our own lawyer. We found a flyer in the courthouse lobby for the Pike County Legal Aid Society. Their office was in the basement of a church a few blocks away. It was a cramped, cluttered space filled with mismatched furniture and stacks of files that threatened to topple over. The air smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Behind a mountain of books sat a man who looked as weary as the furniture. He had a kind, tired face, a rumpled suit, and glasses perched on the end of his nose. His name was Samuel Jean. He listened patiently as I told him everything. I started with being kicked out, the bus ride, the dugout. I told him about the box, and I handed him our grandfather's letter. He read it slowly, his expression growing more and more intent. He read it twice. When he was done, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Well," he said, his voice quiet, "this is quite the story." He looked from me to Maya, and for the first time since this all started, I felt like someone was seeing us, not as problems, not as victims, but as people. "Dawson, Finch and Associates," he murmured, tapping the probate record. "Old man Finch, that would be David's father. He was a notorious land use attorney. Made a fortune helping developers bend the rules. If he handled your grandfather's will, you can bet he structured it to be as weak as possible." Mr. Jean explained the situation in stark terms. Blue Ridge Development was a massive corporation. They had a history of aggressive tactics. Our grandfather's letter was powerful as a statement of intent, but it might not have much legal standing on its own. The offer Finch had made us was what he called a scare tactic. They wanted to either buy us out cheap or intimidate us into folding. The threat of eminent domain was real, but not as simple as Finch made it sound. "They're counting on you being poor, scared, and alone," Mr. Jean said. "They're not counting on you having this." He tapped the letter. "And they're not counting on you having me." He agreed to take our case pro bono. He said it was the most interesting thing to walk through his door in a decade. For the first time, a sliver of real hope broke through my fear. We weren't alone anymore. We had an ally. The battle had begun, and we had just fired our first shot. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of tense waiting and hard physical work. Mr. Jean filed an official notice of intent to establish a conservation easement on our property, citing our grandfather's letter as evidence of his original wishes. It was a legal grenade tossed into Blue Ridge Development's plans. The immediate effect was that they couldn't break ground near our land until the matter was settled. It bought us time. But it also painted a giant target on our backs. The developers retaliated. Surveyors started showing up at the edge of our property, planting stakes with bright pink ribbons. They were marking out paths for roads, for utility lines, trying to intimidate us, to make their presence feel inevitable. Twice we found our small trail to the main road blocked by a fallen tree, too large for us to move easily. It was petty harassment designed to wear us down. At night, we'd sometimes hear trucks idling on the road, their headlights cutting through the trees. We reinforced the dugout, making the entrance smaller and easier to conceal. We felt like a tiny, besieged garrison holding a forgotten outpost. But the dugout was also becoming a home. With the little money we earned from the general store, we bought supplies. A small portable camp stove, thick sleeping bags, a solar-powered lantern. We built shelves into the dirt walls. Maya tacked her drawings up, bright splashes of color in the earthy darkness. We dug a small trench to divert rainwater away from the entrance. We cleared a tiny patch of ground nearby and with seeds given to us by the store owner's wife, we planted a small garden of lettuce and radishes. It was a pathetic little garden, but the sight of those first green shoots pushing through the soil felt like a miracle. We were putting down roots, literally. The woods, once a source of fear, became a source of comfort. We learned its rhythms, its sounds. We knew the call of the barred owl that hunted at dusk, the path the deer took to the creek, the places where wild blackberries grew thickest. This small patch of worthless land was providing for us. It was protecting us. I spent hours reading through the other letters in our grandfather's box. They were mostly to our grandmother, written from field sites all over the world. They were love letters, filled with detailed descriptions of rock formations and soil strata, which was his way of sharing his passion. But woven throughout was his growing disillusionment with the corporate world and his deepening commitment to conservation. He wasn't a radical. He was a scientist who saw a truth others wanted to ignore, that the world was fragile and that some things, once broken, could never be fixed. I felt a profound connection to this man I'd never met. He had faced his own version of David Finch, his own battles against greed and power. He had lost, in the end. He ran out of time. But he hadn't surrendered. He had planted a seed of resistance, a secret buried in a metal box, hoping that someday someone would come along to water it. And somehow, that someone was us. One afternoon, while I was splitting firewood, I looked over at Maya. She was sitting on a log, her sketchbook open, but she wasn't drawing. She was just looking up at the canopy of leaves, a small, peaceful smile on her face. She looked happy, truly happy. Not the temporary, fleeting happiness of a kid who gets a new toy, but a deep, settled contentment. She wasn't cold or hungry. She wasn't afraid of being sent away to a new home. She was safe. She was home. And I realized that the dugout, our secret hole in the ground, had already saved us. It had saved us from being separated. It had saved us from the streets. It had given us a place to stand and fight back. The $250,000 Finch had offered couldn't have bought this feeling. That money would have been a ticket out, but it would have been an escape, not a victory. It would have meant selling our grandfather's legacy, and in a way, selling ourselves. By choosing to stay, by choosing to fight, we had chosen to become the people our grandfather had hoped we would be. We had inherited not just his land, but his purpose. Home, I realized, wasn't about four walls and a roof. It was about having a place in the world that was yours, a place where you belonged. It was about having a purpose that was bigger than your own survival. It was about the people you shared it with. For me and Maya, home was a 10 by 10-foot room under the earth, in the heart of a forest we had promised to protect. The breakthrough came on a cold Tuesday in February. Mr. Jean called us from a payphone in town. His voice was electric with excitement. "I found it, Leo," he said, practically shouting over the static. "The smoking gun!" While digging through the county's archaic planning archives, a place no one had probably looked in decades, he'd found a preliminary filing from 1989. It was an application for a conservation easement for our exact plot of land, filed by Arthur Vance. It was incomplete. It was missing signatures, a final survey. It had been denied due to insufficient documentation. But it was proof. It was concrete, legal proof that our grandfather's letter wasn't just a wish. It was an action he had already started to take. The reason it was incomplete, Mr. Jean discovered, was that Arthur Vance had been admitted to the hospital the week it was due. He died 2 months later. He hadn't failed because he gave up. He had failed because his body gave out. Armed with this new evidence, Mr. Jean filed a motion to enforce the original easement. He also, and this was the brilliant part, leaked the story to a regional environmental blog. He framed it perfectly. Orphaned teens defend grandfather's legacy, protect county water source from corporate greed. The story exploded. It was picked up by a larger newspaper, then a TV station. Suddenly, we weren't just two kids in the woods. We were a cause. The pristine aquifer our grandfather had discovered became the star of the show. Local activists, who had been fighting Blue Ridge on other fronts for years, rallied to our side. The public narrative shifted. Blue Ridge wasn't a developer bringing jobs anymore. They were a corporate bully trying to poison a local water source and steal land from a pair of orphans. The bad press was a nightmare for them. Their stock dipped. The county board, the same one Finch had claimed was in their pocket, started getting nervous. The final showdown wasn't in a courtroom. It was a quiet, anticlimactic surrender. Blue Ridge Development formally withdrew their petitions and announced they were revising their development plans to exclude our parcel and the surrounding area, citing unexpected environmental sensitivities. It was a corporate way of saying they had lost. We had won. The conservation easement was finalized a month later. The land was now permanently protected. It could never be developed. It would remain a forest forever. That evening, Maya and I stood at the edge of our property, looking out at the trees. The pink surveyor ribbons were gone. The woods were quiet, peaceful. It was over. We had done it. "We did it, Grandpa," Maya whispered, as if he were standing right there with us. And in a way, he was. The future is still unwritten. The legal victory didn't magically solve all our problems. We're still poor. I'm finishing my high school diploma online, and Maya will start at the local high school in the fall. We still live in the dugout, though we're planning to build a small, legal cabin on the property soon, using sustainable timber from our own land. A local builder who read our story has offered to help us for free. Mr. Jean set up a small trust for us, funded by donations that poured in after the news story broke. It's not a fortune, but it's enough for us to live on, to buy food and books, to plan for college. It's more than we've ever had. But the real inheritance wasn't the land or the money. It was the choice we made. We chose to honor a promise, to fight for something bigger than ourselves. And in doing so, we found something we thought we'd lost forever. A home, a family, and a future we can build with our own hands. We learned that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones that have no price tag, and that even when the world throws you away, you can still find a piece of earth to call your own, put down roots, and grow. So now I want to turn it back to you. This entire journey started because two kids were thrown out with nothing but a promise. It taught us that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you create. It's the love you protect and the purpose you defend. If you have a story about finding or building your own home in an unexpected way, I want you to share it in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories, your struggles, and your victories are what this channel is all about. You are not alone. By sharing our truth, we build a community that's stronger than any corporation, a home for everyone who has ever felt lost. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories to tell.